don't even know where to start with this. Maybe I should have known better, but at the time I was desperate. I wasn't thinking straight. Rent was piling up. Medical bills were haunting me like shadows, and my job was barely enough to keep the lights on, let alone cover the cost of the accident that left me limping for months. My leg was messed up from that day, and I hadn't fully recovered. Surgery would cost me thousands, and physical therapy wasn't covered by the joke of insurance I had. I was angry, frustrated, and in pain. I needed a way out. Something, anything, to pull me out of the hole I was sinking into. So, when I found that forum, that dark web post, I thought, what the hell? How much worse could things get? Turns out, much worse. I'd been lurking on these sketchy forums for a while, not actively engaging, but just watching. I guess you could call it research, finding out how deep this rabbit hole went. Most of it was the typical nonsense: fake assassins, secret government files, scammy cryptocurrency deals. But then, I stumbled across a post that was different. It wasn't selling anything. It was looking for volunteers. Need cash? Quick money for a simple medical trial. Earn $100,000 in 1 week. No prior conditions necessary. It was vague, but the number caught my eye. $100,000. You don't see a number like that and not think about it, especially when you're drowning in debt. 100 grand would fix everything. It would cover my medical bills, rent for months, and then some. I'd be able to get my life back. Without overthinking, I clicked on the link. It redirected me to some weird encrypted page, like something out of a cheap hacker movie. There was a form. Basic stuff like my age, health history, and oddly enough, my willingness to sign a waiver. The waiver part threw me off for a second, but I pushed through. Maybe they were some kind of underground pharmaceutical company trying to avoid government regulations. I mean, I knew it was shady, but I didn't care. I needed the money. That's what desperation does to you. It makes you ignore red flags. After filling everything out, I got an email almost immediately asking if I could meet them at a private location. It didn't feel like an invitation, it felt like an order. There was no introduction, no explanation, just an address and a time. Part of me wanted to back out right then and there, but I didn't. The thought of that money was too intoxicating. I went. Like an idiot, I went. The place was about an hour out of the city, in the middle of nowhere, some abandoned-looking warehouse, the kind of place you see in horror movies and scream at the screen, "Don't go in there." But life's not a movie, and I wasn't screaming. I was limping, slowly making my way through the overgrown weeds and broken concrete. There were no signs, no one waiting for me. For a second, I thought I'd been set up, but then this black SUV rolled up, its windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. The passenger door opened, and 2 guys stepped out. They weren't the friendly type. You know the kind of men who don't need to introduce themselves because their presence alone says everything. "You're here for the trial?" one of them asked, his voice cold and mechanical. I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, to get the hell out of there, but my legs felt frozen. Before I knew it, I was being guided into the SUV, my heart pounding louder than the engine. They didn't say much after that. The drive was long, maybe another hour, but I couldn't tell where we were headed because the windows were completely blacked out. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that this was all part of the procedure. But something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. The SUV stopped in front of what looked like a private hospital, or at least, that's what I convinced myself it was. We went inside and everything looked clinical, sterile. There were nurses, doctors, at least people dressed like them, but none of them looked at me. They didn't make eye contact. They just kept their heads down, moving from room to room. They took me into a small room, handed me some scrubs, and told me to change. "The doctor will be with you shortly," one of the men said before locking the door behind him. Yeah, locking the door. I felt a knot form in my stomach. It was then I started thinking this might have been a mistake, but $100,000. I kept repeating that number in my head. Just get through this. Just a few tests, and I'd be free, right? Wrong. When the doctor finally came in, he didn't introduce himself. He didn't even ask for my name. He just strapped me to a table. I thought this was part of the test, some kind of precaution, right? They didn't want me moving around or something. But then he pulled out this syringe. That's when I started panicking. I asked him what it was for, but he didn't answer. He just injected it into my arm, and within minutes I could feel it, a cold, burning sensation that spread through my veins like fire. My vision blurred, my heart raced, and everything went dark. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, I was in a different room, strapped down to a metal bed. My head was pounding, my leg was aching worse than before, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. That's when I noticed the cuts. There were deep, jagged incisions running up and down my arms, like someone had been experimenting on me while I was unconscious. My skin was raw, bloody, and I could see the stitches holding everything together. I screamed, but no one came. The room was soundproofed, and the only noise I could hear was the hum of machines around me. That's when the real horror started. Over the next few hours, or maybe it was days, it was hard to tell in that place, I was subjected to things I can barely even describe. They injected me with God knows what, ran electrical currents through my body, and kept slicing me open, experimenting, testing. My body became a lab rat for their twisted science, and the pain. I can't even begin to explain the pain. It wasn't just physical, it was mental. They kept showing me things, images, videos, flashing them on screens, trying to break me. And they did. I broke. By the time they were done with me, I wasn't the same person. I don't even know if I was a person anymore. Just a hollow shell, barely alive, stitched together like a grotesque puzzle. And then, without any warning, they dumped me. Literally. I woke up in a ditch, miles away from the city, my body bruised, bleeding, and barely functional. I had no money, no explanation, no way to prove what happened to me. I was just another victim of the dark web, another nameless face in their twisted game, but I escaped. I survived, barely. When I woke up in that ditch, everything hurt. My entire body was a mess, blood crusted over the cuts they had stitched up, bruises covering my legs, my arms, even my chest. But it was my mind that felt the worst, like it had been ripped apart and glued back together with pieces missing. The images they forced me to see, the things they didn't leave scars that could heal. I don't remember much about how I got back to the city. I think I limped my way for hours, maybe a whole day, before I found myself back in civilization. A gas station clerk saw me and called an ambulance. I wasn't even mad. I was just relieved someone gave a damn. I couldn't tell them the truth, though. How could I explain what happened? I had no proof. The bruises, the stitches, sure, they could see those, but who would believe a story about some dark web experiment? The cops. They'd probably just write me off as some junkie who got into the wrong crowd. The hospital kept me for a few days, pumped me full of antibiotics, stitched me up again properly, and gave me the usual concerned looks, like they knew I wasn't telling them everything. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get the hell out of there, to forget. But I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those flashes again, those horrific, sickening images they forced into my head. It wasn't just random gore either. It was surgical, methodical. They showed people being dissected, but not like in some horror movie. It was real. The cuts were precise. The people, they were still alive. I'd hear them scream, and it would echo in my head, making me want to tear my own ears off. But I wasn't the only one. I don't know how I figured it out. Maybe it was the look in their eyes, or maybe it was just a gut feeling. But every time I looked at someone on the street, I saw it. They knew. Maybe not consciously, but they knew. They had seen the same things I had. They had been shown those images too. I started noticing the marks. Small things at first, a limp here, a bandage there. People who looked off, like they had been through something but weren't talking about it. They looked like me, wounded, broken. Some of them tried to hide it, but I knew. You don't go through something like that and just walk away. It was like we were all part of some sick club, initiated by the same hands that had tortured us. One day, while I was walking, more like limping, down the street, I saw someone watching me. He was leaning against a wall, arms crossed, face hidden beneath a hood. At first, I thought he was just some random guy, but as I passed him, I saw the bandages peeking out from under his sleeves, the same kind of stitches I had. He followed me. I didn't confront him right away. I was too scared. My body was still weak, and I wasn't sure I could fight him off if it came to that. So I picked up the pace, ducked down side streets, tried to lose him in the crowd, but he stayed on me like a shadow. No matter where I went, I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my skull. Finally, I ducked into a run-down diner, hoping to hide in the crowd. I slipped into a booth in the back, my heart racing, the pain in my leg throbbing worse than ever. I thought maybe I'd lost him, that he'd given up. Then he slid into the booth across from me. I froze. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me from under that hood, his face mostly hidden in shadow. I could barely see his eyes, but I knew they were watching me, studying me. "You survived," he finally said, his voice raspy like he hadn't spoken in days. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too dry and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. "They let you go, didn't they?" he continued, leaning forward, his hands resting on the table. I could see the bandages more clearly now, blood seeping through in places. "You don't get to leave unless they want you to." I tried to swallow, tried to think of something to say, but my brain was scrambling, and all I could do was stare at him, waiting for him to make a move. "They're not done with you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversations around us. "They never are." That's when I saw it. His hands. They were shaking too, but not like mine. His fingers were twitching, moving involuntarily, like they had a mind of their own. I thought back to the experiments, to the wires they hooked up to me, the shocks they sent through my body. Were they controlling him somehow? I didn't stay to find out. I bolted out of the booth, pain shooting through my leg, but I didn't care. I just ran. I could hear him behind me, calling my name, shouting that it wasn't over, that they were coming, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. That night, I locked myself in my apartment, barricaded the door, and tried to calm my racing heart. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound outside, every creak in the floorboards made me jump. I kept thinking he would come after me, that they would come after me. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't sleep the next night either. The days blurred together. Every time I left my apartment, I saw them. People like me, the bandaged, the broken, watching me, following me, whispering to each other. I was losing it. My mind was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. I hadn't left the door unlocked. I knew I hadn't, but someone was inside. I could hear them moving around, slow, deliberate. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Then I heard it, my name, whispered from the corner of the room. I didn't even have time to scream before everything went black again. When I woke up again, I was no longer in my apartment. The familiar smell of damp walls and cheap carpet was gone, replaced by something sterile, almost clinical. My head was pounding, my throat dry as sandpaper, and the only sound I could hear was the steady beep of some machine nearby. My body felt heavy, almost numb, as if every muscle had been frozen in place. Panic surged through me as I realized I was strapped down. Not again. It took me a few minutes to fully grasp where I was. The room was small, windowless, with harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above me. There were machines to my left, connected to my arms with tubes and needles. I tried to scream, but my voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. My lips were cracked, my tongue swollen. I felt like I hadn't had water in days. Then I saw her. A woman, dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform, but it wasn't the usual blue or white. It was black, like something you'd expect from a horror movie, with latex gloves that clung tightly to her fingers. She was fiddling with the machine beside me, her back turned, like I wasn't even there, like I was just another part of the equipment. What are you doing?" My voice came out hoarse, barely audible, but she didn't react. She just kept adjusting the machine, pressing buttons, making small beeping sounds echo in the room. I tried to move, but the straps held me down, digging into my wrists and ankles. Every time I strained, the fabric rubbed my skin raw. My heart was racing. It felt like my chest was about to explode. Why was I here? How did they find me again? "Please, let me go." This time, I managed to get a bit louder, enough to make her pause. She turned to face me slowly, her eyes cold, empty, like she was looking at a specimen rather than a person. "You're not ready yet," she said, in the most emotionless voice I'd ever heard. It was like she was talking about a piece of meat rather than a human being. "Ready? Ready for what?" My voice cracked as I spoke, my mind racing to figure out what was going on. I didn't want to hear the answer, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. She didn't respond. Instead, she injected something into the IV drip that was running into my arm. Almost immediately, I felt my head get lighter, the edges of my vision blurring. I tried to fight it, tried to stay conscious, but it was like my body was betraying me, slipping back into darkness. When I came to again, it was worse. I wasn't alone. There were more of them now, people, patients, whatever you want to call them, strapped to beds just like mine, lined up against the walls. The room had expanded somehow, like it wasn't just a small room anymore, but a massive hall. Rows of metal tables, all filled with bodies, some conscious, some not. And every single one of them had those same deep, jagged scars running up their arms, their legs, their torsos, like they'd been torn apart and sewn back together. Some were screaming, others were crying, but the worst were the ones who didn't make a sound. They just stared, wide-eyed, completely broken. The kind of look that comes from seeing something so horrific your mind simply shuts down. I wasn't strapped down anymore, but I couldn't move. My body was still too weak. My limbs felt like jelly, my head pounding from whatever they had drugged me with. I managed to roll off the table, landing on the cold tile floor with a thud. The impact sent a wave of pain through my entire body, but I didn't care. I needed to move. I needed to get out. I crawled, dragging myself toward the nearest exit, my hands slick with blood. Whether it was mine or someone else's, I didn't know. The air smelled metallic, like rust and old blood, thick and suffocating. My vision was blurry, but I could make out shadows moving around me. The nurses were walking between the rows of patients, checking machines, injecting more drugs, completely ignoring me as if I was nothing. That's when I saw him again. The man from the diner, the one who had followed me. He was strapped down on one of the tables, his eyes wide open, but his face, it wasn't right. His mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread, blood seeping through the stitches. His hands twitched just like before, the same uncontrollable movements, but this time they were worse, more violent. He was shaking so hard, the metal table rattled beneath him. I tried to reach out, tried to say something, but no sound came out of my mouth. My throat felt like it had been stuffed with cotton, dry and burning. All I could do was watch as his body convulsed, thrashing against the straps holding him down. Then, without warning, he stopped. His body went still, his head falling to one side, and I saw it. The look in his eyes, it was gone. Whatever had been keeping him alive, keeping him there, was gone. They had taken it from him, just like they were taking it from the rest of us. I managed to pull myself up against the wall, leaning heavily on my good leg. I needed to get out, but every door was locked, every exit blocked. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't freak out now. Not when I was so close to freedom. Then I saw it. A door at the far end of the hall, slightly ajar, light streaming through the crack. I didn't think. I just moved, dragging myself across the floor, the sounds of the other patients fading into the background. My entire body screamed in protest, every step sending waves of agony through my broken leg, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. As I reached the door, I heard it. The whispering. My name. Again. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Dozens. Hundreds. All whispering my name in unison, their voices overlapping, growing louder with every second. My heart raced, my hands shaking as I pushed the door open, desperate to escape the sound, to get away from whatever was coming. But when I stepped through the door, I realized I hadn't escaped. I hadn't gotten away at all. I was back where I started. The same room, the same hall, the same faces staring at me, broken and bleeding, stitched together like some grotesque experiment. And that's when I knew I was never getting out. They weren't done with me. Not even close. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the same room I had just left. Time didn't make sense anymore. The whispers were still there, growing louder, coming from every direction but somehow still inside my head. My mind was unraveling, and I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. The room was the same, yet different. It shifted, like the walls were breathing, pulsing, as if the building itself was alive, feeding off the fear and pain of everyone trapped inside. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, tightening around my lungs, but I couldn't move. My legs were trembling, my hands numb from gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles had turned white. My body was giving up, shutting down, but my brain refused to stop. I kept thinking, kept repeating to myself, this isn't real, it can't be real, but it was. I had to get out, I had to try again. But the room was watching me. I could feel it, like there were eyes on me, invisible but undeniable. Every movement I made felt like it was being tracked, like I was part of some sick game, and no matter what I did, I was always losing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned, my heart pounding in my ears, and saw one of the nurses, or whatever they were, standing in the hallway. She was holding something, a syringe, long and glistening with some thick, dark liquid. It didn't look like any kind of medicine I'd ever seen. It looked wrong, like poison. "Time for your next treatment," she said, her voice soft, almost pleasant, like she was offering me a glass of water or some aspirin. My stomach lurched. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet, but she was faster. She closed the distance between us in a few quick strides, grabbing my arm with a strength I didn't expect. Her grip was ice cold, sending a shock of pain up my shoulder as she twisted me toward the bed. "No, no, no, please!" I screamed, thrashing, but it was no use. She was stronger than she looked, her fingers digging into my skin, her nails leaving deep welts as she dragged me toward the bed. I fought with everything I had, but my body was weak, still battered from the last round of whatever they had done to me. My legs buckled, my vision blurred, but I kept fighting. Then, just as she was about to pin me down, I saw it, a scalpel glinting on a nearby tray. Without thinking, I reached out, grabbed it, and slashed at her hand. She screamed. It wasn't a human scream, though. It was something else, something guttural, animalistic. Her face twisted in pain, or maybe rage, and she let go of me, clutching her bleeding hand. I didn't wait to see what she'd do next. I ran, limping as fast as my injured leg would let me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The hallways were endless. Every turn I made led to more doors, more identical rooms filled with more of those people, those broken, hollowed-out people. The ones who had been through what I had, or worse. I could hear them whispering, crying, begging for release, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't help them. I could barely help myself. The walls were closing in. I could feel them getting closer, the whispers getting louder, crawling under my skin. My head was spinning, my vision swimming with dark spots. My hands shook uncontrollably, the scalpel still slick with the nurse's blood. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know if I was still inside the building. Everything looked the same. Everything felt the same. It was like I was trapped in some endless loop, running in circles, always ending up right back where I started. Then I found it. A door. Not like the others. This one was heavy, metal, with a big, industrial lock on it. It looked out of place, too solid for a place like this. But it was my only option. I didn't care if it led to another trap or another experiment. I just needed to get away from the whispers, from the pain, from whatever they were trying to do to me. I threw myself against it, my shoulder screaming in protest, but the door didn't budge. I tried again, slamming into it with all the strength I had left, but it wouldn't move. Panic surged through me. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. My body was shutting down, and I was running out of time. I needed to get out. I had to get out. That's when I noticed the keypad. It was small, almost hidden next to the door, like they didn't want anyone to see it. I didn't know the code. How could I? But I had to try something. I punched in random numbers, praying for some kind of miracle. Nothing. I tried again, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely press the buttons, my vision blurred, my hands slippery with sweat. Then, out of nowhere, a voice whispered in my ear, 7, 9, 6, 2. I froze. The voice wasn't in my head this time. It was right behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel them there, breathing down my neck, their presence heavy, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed with fear, my fingers hovering over the keypad. 7, 9, 6, 2, the voice repeated, softer this time, almost mocking. I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to trust it. But what choice did I have? I was out of options, out of time. With a trembling hand, I punched in the numbers. The door clicked. It swung open with a low creak, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Thick, suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. I hesitated for a second, just long enough to hear the voice whisper again, this time right next to my ear. "They're waiting for you." I stepped through, and the door slammed shut behind me. The darkness was absolute, so thick I couldn't even see my own hands in front of me. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of my own blood rushing through my ears louder than anything else. I could feel something in the air, though, something cold, wet, like I had stepped into a cave deep underground. The smell was thick, damp, metallic, like rusted iron and rotting meat. Then, without warning, a light flickered on above me, dim and yellow, barely enough to see by. But what I saw, God, I wish I hadn't. The room was full of bodies, dozens of them. Some were hanging from the ceiling by their wrists, others were strapped to tables, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. And they were all alive. Barely. Some of them groaned, their eyes rolling back in their heads, their mouths moving as if they were trying to scream, but no sound came out. In the corner, there was a figure standing in the shadows, watching me. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their gaze burning into me. They were waiting, and I knew, in that moment, that this was it. I wasn't going to escape. Not this time. I didn't want to move. I wanted to turn around, pound on that door, scream until someone came to get me, but deep down, I knew no one was coming. There was no one left to save me. I had walked straight into hell, and the worst part, I knew I wasn't going to leave. The figure in the corner shifted, stepping into the weak light. My breath caught in my throat as I finally saw them. No, it. This thing, this creature, wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, veins snaking underneath like dark tendrils. Its eyes, God, its eyes, were sunken deep into its skull, glowing with an unnatural light that made my stomach turn. There was no expression on its face, no sign of emotion or empathy. It was just empty, like a puppet being controlled by something far worse. The air around me grew colder as it moved closer, slow and deliberate, like it was savoring my fear. I couldn't stop shaking. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs were frozen, locked in place by sheer terror. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It stopped inches from me, its breath hot and rancid on my face. I wanted to scream, to push it away, but my body wouldn't obey. My voice was gone, choked off by the panic constricting my throat. Then it spoke. "You're not leaving," it rasped, the sound more like metal scraping against metal than an actual voice. "You were never meant to leave." I tried to back away, but it grabbed my arm, its grip cold and impossibly strong. Pain shot through my body as its fingers dug into my skin, holding me in place. "Let me go," I finally managed to choke out, though my voice was weak, almost pathetic. But it didn't care. It tilted its head, studying me like I was some kind of specimen, and then it smiled. That smile, it wasn't human. It was wide, too wide, stretching across its face in a way that made my stomach churn. "You don't understand," it hissed, leaning in closer, its voice dripping with malice. "You're part of something bigger now. We all are." Behind it, the bodies hanging from the ceiling began to twitch, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. Their eyes, those same hollow, dead eyes, fixed on me, and I could feel them pulling me in, dragging me deeper into whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. The creature tightened its grip, dragging me across the room toward one of the tables. I tried to fight, but it was no use. My body was broken, weak, and whatever strength I had left was fading fast. It slammed me onto the metal slab, its cold hands pinning me down as it reached for something just out of sight. I craned my neck, trying to see, but the pain was too much, my vision swimming with dark spots. Then I heard it, the sound of metal against metal, the unmistakable click of a blade being unfolded. "No, no, no, please." But it didn't stop. The creature moved methodically, almost gently, as it placed the scalpel against my chest. I could feel the cold metal against my skin, the sharp edge pressing down just enough to break the surface. This was it. This was how it was going to end. I tried to brace myself for the pain, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The creature sliced through my skin with a precision that felt practiced, like it had done this 1,000 times before. The pain was immediate, sharp, like fire spreading through my veins. I screamed, my voice echoing through the room, but no one came. No one even flinched. The bodies hanging from the ceiling swayed gently, as if they were nodding in agreement, as if they had been through this too and knew exactly what was coming. But it wasn't just the physical pain. There was something else, something deeper. As the creature cut into me, I could feel it pulling something out of me, something more than just flesh. It was like it was reaching into my very soul, dragging out every fear, every nightmare, every piece of myself that I had tried to keep hidden. I don't know how long it went on. Time stopped making sense. The pain was endless, relentless, and every second felt like an eternity. I could feel myself slipping away, my mind fracturing under the weight of it all, but the creature didn't stop. It kept cutting, kept probing, its eyes locked on mine the entire time. Then, just as I was about to lose consciousness, it stopped. The creature stepped back, its bloodied hand still gripping the scalpel, and smiled that same horrible, unnatural smile. "You're ready now," it whispered, stepping away from the table. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream anymore. My body was a broken mess, my mind shattered beyond repair. I was barely holding on, and I knew that I was about to die. But then, something happened. The whispers, the ones that had been haunting me, that had followed me through every step of this nightmare, they grew louder. They filled the room, echoing off the walls, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that were impossible to understand. And then, in an instant, the door behind me burst open. Light flooded the room, blinding me for a second, and I could hear voices, real voices, human voices, shouting orders, footsteps rushing toward me. I thought I was hallucinating, that my mind had finally snapped, but then I felt hands, real, warm hands, grabbing me, lifting me off the table. "Get him out of here!" someone shouted. I couldn't see. My vision was too blurred, too hazy, but I could feel them moving me, carrying me through the room, away from the creature, away from the nightmare. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of the creature's laughter, echoing through the halls, mixing with the screams of the other patients. It knew I wasn't really free. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, a real one this time. The white walls, the clean sheets, the sound of beeping machines, it was all so normal, so mundane, it almost felt like a dream. But it wasn't. I still had the scars. They had stitched me up, patched me together, but the marks were still there. And the whispers, they never stopped. I'm not free. I never will be. And I know deep down that they're not done with me.